LaunchLeft podcast. Podcast, and we'll launch left.
Hello, everyone. My name is Connie Lim. I perform under the artist name MILCK, MILCK, and I'm so excited to do the Artist Takeover for LaunchLeft. And I'm excited because I get to have a conversation with someone who is not only an incredible artist, but I know personally that she's also a great friend and human being. She's a sister in a lot of activism. I learned so much from Hollis in terms of how to be mindful of my blind spots. And Hollis is an incredible Grammy nominated songwriter. And we have to say it like that. Every time I say that, I'm going to use that accent. And so I want to welcome Hollis Wong-Wear. Welcome.
Thank you. Big fan. So thankful.
I like that you're in the background. You have a sign that says, "Let the work speak."
Yes.
Very great and very on brand for the conversation we're having today.
It's gifted to me by my dear friend, Kara Brown. That's done by Rio and Honey. It's a Black woman artist and maker, craft artist in Brooklyn.
Oh, very cool. So did you find it did you know about her work beforehand? Because I know you grew up in you like a lot of your art has been influenced by your slam poetry experience. Like, did you hear about this work through just the course of your life, or you just found it on Instagram? I'm so curious.
Oh, this was a present from my friend Kara for my birthday, which was really sweet. And it was one of my favorite presents I ever got. I was just reflecting on that. I was just like, it's so nice to have like a gift that's both like art and message and motivator. So yeah, Rio and Honey, check out that artist. They're dope.
That's a good shout out. And you were saying that it's art, it has a message. And I'd love to just dive in and ask you a little bit about how your journey with understanding the power of messaging through your art has been. Like, when did you first realize you could use your creative powers to communicate something bigger than yourself?
Totally. Thank you. As you mentioned, I got my start in generative art through poetry. So when I was growing up, I performed in choir and in theater and in musical theater. And that's where I learned a lot as a performer. In a choir, especially, learned a lot about how to blend and to work as one. And there's a lot of collectivism and community that's kind of inherent within theater and choral performance. But my first generative art practice started when I went to a poetry slam when I was 15, and it was an organization in the Bay Area called Youth Speaks that provides support and space for young people to express themselves through poetry. And it was just such a revelatory event in my life. I was just completely stunned. It was like a theater of thousands. I'm pretty sure it was at the San Francisco Opera House that this teen poetry slam was being held. And it was just thousands of people watching young teen poets express themselves with nothing more than their own words, their own story, and a microphone and their voice. No accoutrement, no props, no nothing. And it was such a lightning bolt for me to realize how deeply powerful art and testimony could be together. And I felt moved. I felt changed. I felt vibrated into a more evolved sense of self. And it was just an inherent and completely intuitive understanding of the power of art and narrative, and how it can shift us into being more awake and alive and connected. And I think I've just always been chasing that feeling ever since. I think there was also in that moment seeing not only these young poets be, it was competitive, but at the same time, the competition was just kind of a ruse for this type of presentation to occur. And there's a larger critique there about we need to be competitive in our capitalist society in order to value art in this way that we're going to put, people in the opera house to see teens read poetry. But the young people that I would eventually become, kind of knew that it was all kind of a farce for something way deeper and way more powerful. And that was that level of connectivity of both sharing one story, but also bearing witness to others' stories and being moved by that process of both the bravery of coming to speak out and then also stepping back and listening. And I craved both that artistic catharsis and also artistic community. And I think that was really the foundation of what I've done ever since as an artist. Is really goes back to that moment when I was like 15 years old and like unwittingly found myself at the San Francisco Opera House watching.
Oh, I love that. I have goosebumps thinking about that. And so 15 in Seattle, and before that, had you been was that like kind of the opening, or had you been experimenting with like your ideas beforehand? Was that the birth?
I think for me, I had always been an avid lover of both performing and of just culture and music and creativity. And I thinking back on it, I'm definitely of the Pen 15 generation. I don't know if you guys We were in chat rooms we should not have been in. We were in message boards talking about some radical stuff.
Yes.
I think I always loved, I loved making zines. I loved like underground everything. I loved like downloading pure rap songs on LimeWire that took like 5 hours to download. I was just like craving something more than, you know what I mean? And I think I was always kind of seeking sneakily it out. But I think that moment when I went to that poetry slam was the moment that it all kind of like became possible and real, not only in the tangible sense of community, like, oh, this is actually like a community and like a nonprofit organization that I could plug into as a young person, but also just like, this is an art form that will allow me to channel what it is I have to say. Because in theater, it's all about how do you embody a character. I mean, first you have to get cast as that character and have permission to play that character. And then how do you be this character? And what does that mean? And here I'm like, oh, actually, I am the character and I am writing my own story. I'm charting my own path, both in my interpretation of my own history, but also in what is possible in the future. And it was just so like empowered is almost like too trite of a term to talk about the kind of that fiery sense of like possibility that I felt in that moment in a way that I truly had never felt before.
Yeah. I think as you talk about slam poetry and what it has been able to do to help bring the spotlight back on humanity and our lives. We are the characters living our lives and finding those words to express it. Like, I feel like slam poetry wasn't as well known of an art form at that time. So it also felt like a really special time. Would you say that as well?
It was just bubbling, like I was really into like Saul Williams and like Def Poetry Jam was definitely like happening. And, that just reminds me, like, I really like valorized the poets that I saw like on HBO's Def Poetry Jam. And one of the poets there was a poet named Bosia, and he was the first Asian American person I had ever seen read poetry in my life. And I seeing him, and then later, like, because of my involvement in spoken word and like the intersection of Asian American community and activist community and spoken word community, I actually not only met, but became friends with Bo. And that was just like something where I'm like, oh, like I'm actually like, I think this is kind of a theme in my life where I idolize and admire and aspire to be these figures that just due to the close knitness of whether it's music or poetry, I end up becoming friends with. And like, I won't go so far as to say like peers per se, because I feel like I learned so much from them, and I kind of, they're my venerated, not elders, but you know what I mean? Like
humble perspective. I like that.
Yeah. I think for me, I'm just really thankful that the people who I looked at as pure inspiration, like I ended up being able to be in community with. And I think that's like shaped a lot of who I am.
That's so beautiful. Yeah. There's a community out in Los Angeles called Tuesday Night Cafe. And it's the US's longest standing public art series created by the AAPI people. And I first heard Bosia there, and the way he is able to craft words and then like emotionally lean into the words or gently sit and whisper into them and then like climax at a point where there's like just like all the emotions are exploding out like fireworks, and I'm just so moved. It's such an art form. There's so much respect, and I think I see this parallel with music and songwriting, where with melodies and rhythms, we create these crescendos as the poets are doing without any music, which is incredible, and just words and ideas and swag. And then, so the music aspect of it, I'm curious to hear for you how music and music creation started coming into your life.
Yeah, totally. And before I go into that, I just want to kind of build on a point that you just mentioned in terms of Bo. Again, big shout out to Bo Sia, but his just the explosive, fiery, raw, kinetic nature of his poetry was so counter to any stereotype or concept I had of Asian Americans, of Asian men. And that's what I think was so like transformative for me, seeing him for the first time, not only being able to see somebody of my identity reflected and saying, oh, it might be possible, but also like, I can be unbridled. I can be chaotic. Like I can bring the noise, you know, and like that permission just by seeing somebody else perform, it's hard to describe how powerful that is and how important it is for that. You know what I mean? So that's to say that. But I think, yeah, in terms of music, it's interesting because I had always loved music and loved singing and loved performing, but I felt very intimidated by songwriting. Like I think I had tried once and I was like, well, if I haven't written a brilliant song by the age of 16, then I was never like
no pressure.
Yeah, exactly. I just, for some reason I had this like idea, like Michelle Branch actually was a writer that also like, I was like, oh, she's also a mixed Asian person. Like she was like one reflection in pop music. And I think I got a guitar once and I tried to play it once and I wasn't good at it once. And so I was like, I'm never meant to do this. So
very relatable. I've been there too. Yes.
Yeah. So it's funny because poetry. So once I started getting really comfortable, not only with poetry, but just kind of like being really comfortable expressing myself within poetic communities. So I had moved in high school in the Bay Area is where I first found community at Youth Speaks. And then I moved up to Seattle for college and got in with a group called Youth Speaks Seattle, which was like the chapter up there. And we did these writing circles every Thursday, I think it was, where we would all just write off of a prompt. And it was poets anywhere from like ages 15 to like 55. Like we were all like writing and sharing this very like raw, just unearthed poetry. There was a real sense of just kind of taking off the cloak of perfectionism and just sharing yourself in the moment. And then after every writing circle, there would be a cipher. And so we would just like be like, all right, how are we going to turn what we just shared in our stream of consciousness free writes into like rap, basically, and sharing art. And so I started sharpening my skills there. And I was such a fan of hip hop. And through the You Speak Seattle program, I became best friends with a girl named Maddie Clifford, who goes by Mad Lions. And her and I were just like, you know, we love hip hop. We love, like, we're big into like Black Star and Bahamadia and Mystic and just like really into these like underground, very politically focused rappers. And then we looked around at the Seattle landscape and the Seattle hip hop community, which really had inspired me a lot and that I was a huge fan of, but we didn't see any young women doing it at all. And we were like, well, shit,
let's change it.
Might as well be us. So we started a hip hop duo. And I don't think I even sang a hook for like the first 3 years of us and recording. I was purely rapping. And it felt really comfortable for me because I felt comfortable as a poet. And I was getting better at like freestyling and being able to just kind of like move and navigate within rap. And I was such a big fan that was my comfort zone. And singing scared me, and let alone like songwriting. I just felt like, again, it was just this art that if I had this sense in my head, like if I haven't tapped into the genius now, it doesn't exist in my body.
What a myth, right? What a myth.
Myth.
Yeah.
But it did give me, to be able to do that, gave me a lot of confidence, just as a performer, as an artist, as a recording artist. We were we were so DIY. Like I was mixing my own thing, and like it was just not. It wasn't cute. It was like a 2-track. We were ripping.
I think that's real cute, actually.
I know,
right? Like young women.
Yeah, exactly. We were just trying to do and we weren't doing it there was no streaming. There was no, like, you know what I mean? Like there was no even like desire to make it like professional enough. Like it was more just about how can we create things that are kind of almost like a document of these moments that we would then go and perform and be in the real world with. So yeah,
I love that.
For Ray as a recording.
Yeah. It's a couple of things stood out to me that you talked about. Like, I'm so glad you brought up the point about Bosia and he being one of these first representations of full emotional spectrum as an AAPI person. And I think I also think a lot about like Asian men and Asian women are particular boxes that we're put into, and how art can be such a beautiful way for us to lead others, encourage others to just fully be themselves. And in that sense, you know, since LaunchLeft talks so much about art and activism, us as humans just deciding to express, and especially people of color deciding to simply be full and whole, is a whole form of activism within itself. And it's really cool to see that impact it had on you. And you also mentioned another thing about how the writing camp brought up this opportunity for you all to fight perfectionism. And I kind of want to just get your take on perfectionism and if and how it plays a role in your life. How do you deal with it? Like, how do you interface with perfectionism?
Absolutely. I think it's tough because perfectionism is a type of self-censorship. And I definitely know that throughout my career, you know, I think about this a lot. I think about it daily, frankly, like this idea that, especially those of us who have come from, you know, like you and I, Chinese American upbringing specifically, where we are second generation and we are, you know, holding the expectations and also unprocessed ish of our parents and the generations that came before us, both explicit and implicit and subconscious. We feel a desire to actualize their expectations and their hopes and their aspirations so that we are not disappointing. And you and I and many feel a true creative thrust and a calling to be artists. And oftentimes what we do to kind of quote unquote justify or rationalize our decisions to be creatives is we overcompensate. At the point of
so relate. You're speaking truth right now.
So like, I think what we do, and it, you know, doing the artist way helped kind of like bring this out in real, like clear terms for me. The idea that we feel because we're artists, because being an artist is an irresponsible choice, we have to be overly responsible to balance out the irresponsible choice that we've made. And a lot of what the artist way helps to kind of unravel is this: how are you justifying the idea that being an artist is irresponsible or irrational? Can you not look at this long legacy of culture, frankly, of the true human legacy, and think about how we are continuing that in real time, choosing to be artists and creatives today? Like, how can we not feel proud and like it actually is a deep responsibility?
Absolutely.
And so I think perfectionism is a day-to-day way to tighten the screws on this concept of like, I don't want to be irresponsible. I don't want to be, you know, all of the kind of the presumptions of what being an artist entails. And I feel like for music, it's that's why it's like when I'm younger, sometimes I just feel like I'm just trying to channel the person that I was at the age of 19, because I felt so sloppy and uncertain in so many ways when I was at that time. And now when I look back, I'm like, look at this youth that has
right.
She wanted, do whatever she wanted.
Yeah.
You know, and just like there was just that core youth energy, frankly, like the kind of the thoughtless bravery of being young, that we find ways of just, you know, under the guise of sophistication, really like whittling away from that core power. And, you know, I think that for me, like, to be perfect, it's almost like you have, like, first of all, there's no such thing as perfect. I love whoever said, like, there's no such thing as done. It's just, you leave something, like a piece is never done. It's just finished in an interesting place. You just leave it, abandon it at an interesting place.
Yeah. Art is never finished, but abandoned. Yes.
Yeah. And I think, even within spoken word poetry, we realized that at a certain points we'd kind of backed ourselves into corners sometimes where, especially with slam poetry, you're like, oh, I want a poem that like performs well, quote unquote. You get as many tens as possible, quote unquote. And so you start being like, oh, this is my Asian mom poem. This is my breakup poem. This is my, and then you start kind of affixing your identity based on these poems that you think like, quote unquote, perform well, which of course, this larger conversation of art and capitalism. But I think ultimately what I learned, and again, just to tap back into the artist way, is the idea of like, I'll take care, like the universe will take care of the quality and we have to take care of the quantity. And I think oftentimes perfectionism is the stoppage of the quantity.
I feel like you need to repeat that one for everyone.
Right. From the Artist Way. Shout out Julia Cameron. He says, and this was probably the most valuable adage that I like got out of this book is, like when you're talking about the creator, the universe, or whoever you want to call the greater power that compels you, that you are the vessel for as a creative worker, you say you must trust the universe to take care of the quality. So it says, you will take care of the quality and I will take care of the quantity. Which means that when I show up, it's actually not about even making quote unquote good work or great work or compelling work or doing all the descriptives that would justify why you chose to do this super irresponsible thing, like be an artist in the first place. The idea is that to do the work, you sit down and you just do, you just make.
Yeah.
Hard for us sometimes to be like, some of it will invariably be bad and you must create. It's like that Ira Glass quote. You got to create bad work to get good.
Right.
That's what it is. And I think perfectionism, and it's a lot of the reason why I didn't, it took me like 12 years from when I first stepped into a recording studio to release a solo EP. Like I was so afraid for me of doing something that had solely my name on it. And like, if it wasn't good or if it wasn't perfect. And it took me years and years and years to get to the place where I could finally be like, all right, I've stopped in what's hopefully an interesting place.
I am so glad that you have broken through any type of perfectionism to release your music. I love your music. I think it speaks so honestly through the lyrics, and then the vibe of the instrumentation is so good. It just feels good. I feel like you've made really great choices with your sonics, and I feel personally special because I got to witness you make that decision to create art under your name as a solo project. And just as a bit of a background, Hollis and I decided to create this mini get together, a regular community gathering between 4 singer-songwriters, including us both, and Keely Bumford, also known as Dressage, and Lily Kershaw. We would get together regularly. This was just like a few years ago, and we would just share. We would share. It was a safe place for us to workshop any ideas we wanted opinions on, or talk about any obstacles or needs that we wanted, and we'd offer up support for each other. And I think it was like the first meeting we had, you were sitting on Dressage's couch and you're like, I want to do this. And literally it took you, it was so beautiful to watch because it was like 6 weeks or something like that. And you had like your track listing done. You like had the idea and the vision, and you've just been on a roll since. And I wanted to point out a couple of things before I want to bring up your new music and your last releases. There's a saying that I don't know where I heard it from, but I live by it, is when we are creating, there are 3 phases. First is to create like a child. And then second is to refine like a scientist. And the third is to then surrender like a warrior. And I think creating like a child is really tapping back into our hearts, into our bodies, letting the visceral really take over so that we can map out whatever ideas are flowing through us, because we're like these antennas. And so we just let all the data from the universe transmit. We put it down. If we start judging and refining too soon, I feel like we start getting too in our heads too soon. I feel like being an artist, we get really good at, or we try to get really good at, knowing when we let the scientist in, because we all have that scientist. And then the next form of like art is then when do we surrender? Like you said, art is not finished, but abandoned. we choose to just abandon and let it be, because I'm sure you can listen to music as I do. I listen to my music and I'm like, if I hear something I released 4 years ago, I really have to stop myself from creating a new version, because I feel like I could make it better this time. But maybe that's a great, I always have to calm myself down and be like, that's a good sign. That means I've progressed and I'm going to surrender like a warrior and just let that snare sound just continue living on Spotify. And that's what it's going to be, you know?
I can't imagine having the like energy to think about recreating a new master. As soon as I'm listening to the new master, I'm just like, I could just not listen to this again forever, but maybe not. I mean, no, I love my masters like they're children, but no, I hear you with the one snare, the one sound, the one thing that's always going to kind of knot you a little bit, but that's also humility. Do you know what I mean? It's
right.
Like,
right. And that's also a practice for me. I so related to what you said. I was like, just over here getting goosebumps, like how as children of like a second generation children, how we try to prove so much of our choices. And when we've already chosen art, which within itself is just about expression and not being impressive, that I spent a lot of the beginning of my career trying to be impressive. And I didn't realize I was doing it consciously. I was just so hungry for my parents' approval that I did do the first season of The Voice. And that was really an intense experience, because one of the main reasons why I chose art in school, I remember being in middle school and like walking on the track and field, and I was like doing my mandatory PE class, and I was watching the soccer team play, and there was a huge scoreboard with the numbers, like, and I was like, oh my gosh, like there's numbers validating who is better than the others. I'm like, I'm going to do art because there's no scoreboard. And then like,
and then along came streaming.
Oh, yeah.
Viciously quantify your success against others. But before that, it was like Facebook likes. I don't know. There's always going to be some reductive ass analytic way to let people bypass actually sinking into the art and feel like they can gauge impact and quality.
Well said. Well said. It's in nature.
Yeah.
Capitalism. Yeah, for sure. So speaking of lovely streaming numbers and just those warm and fuzzy analytics that make us feel so good about ourselves, you've released new music, and this year you released a song that I just was so, like, my whole body lit up when I saw the email where you announced the release of Grace Lee, the song you did. And there's a whole form of activism and giving back that was connected to that song release. Could you share more about that?
COVID 2020, not a very productive year creatively for your girl. Did not know the what and the why behind the making. And what I actually really had to reckon with was, as a creature of collaboration, I like genuinely did not know how to make music on my own. Like, how do I find the momentum? How do I find the spark? How do I literally record myself in a way that's not bootleg? Like, I just didn't know. And I was really intimidated by it. And I was just really deflated. And I think we all experienced a type of death in that way.
Absolutely.
And we all tried to make it work. I mean, you and I, and just to go back to, you know, first of all, Connie, you've always deeply inspired me as an artist, even when I was just a fan before I met you and we became dear friends and sisters in this work. But yeah, I like to call it our singer-songwriter support group, you, me, Lily.
Yeah.
Really, the four of us, first of all, power of four. I really believe there's something really, really special and magical about the four of us being united in this way, where we're all navigating this very like murky, difficult industry to keep your head above water. And we have each other as flotation devices and as sounding boards and as cheerleaders. I think it's so powerful. And yeah, during COVID, the four of us really like schemed. I mean, one of the first live streams we all did was actually hosted on your platform, and we ended up getting like featured on CNN. It was so wild.
Yeah.
So, we all tried to make it work in the ways we could. And I think we all were dying for like community and like really trying to be connected and be impactful, even when we were sitting at the house and all that thing. But yeah, creating was really hard for me. And I think the why of creating was really hard for me. So at the beginning of this year, I was like, Hollis, you got to figure it out. You got to figure out how to write songs over Zoom with collaborators. You got to do your due. And I went to Joshua Tree for a month to really push myself and be like, I want to continue to be a recording artist. I want to keep creating. I want to keep writing. And while I was out there, like by myself, really, just like me and my friends, I picked up, or actually I was gifted this book by my other dear friend, Zerna Sutri. And it's the autobiography of Grace Lee Boggs called Living for Change. And I had always heard of Grace Lee Boggs as kind of this like civil rights era Asian American activist. And I kind of just knew of her work in Detroit in collaboration with like Black liberation and auto workers and like labor organizing. But it kind of stopped there. And so when I read this book, not only did I find so much resonance within my own experience, like she grew up in her dad's restaurant, like Chinese restaurant. I grew up in my mom's Chinese restaurant. Like she was really into philosophy. She went to Barnard and she just fell into philosophy because she had so many existential questions. And I too am adrift in a sea of existential questions at all times and studied philosophy as an undergrad as well. So there was like a lot of stuff where I was like, oh, I didn't know how dynamic this woman was. And then, I think I just realized I was like, not only and especially in this moment where a lot of our conversation, you and me, and also within our Asian American community is like, what is our place, our responsibility, our accountability to racial equity organizing, to Black-led organizing, to ensuring that we understand the complexities of our place within the fabric of America racially, that we both honor our own experiences and also recognize our privileges. And what does it look like to be accomplices in the work in a meaningful way and not in a performative or purely representation for the sake of representational way. So all of these questions swimming. And I think there's just so much wisdom that I gleaned not only from this book, Living for Change, but also the last book that she wrote before she passed away called The Next American Revolution.
Love that one.
And highly recommend these two books, but especially The Next American Revolution, I think speaks so candidly to our point in time because she really talks about what it means to develop as human beings first, outside of any ideology or platform or political party. She was a big Marxist thinker and activist and writer. And she was really into that like hyper intellectual political scene. And she departed from it to do on the ground grassroots community organizing because she recognized that that's where change would truly take place, not in the hallowed halls of the academy, not and while it's important to engage with theory, at the end of the day, it's what's in practice and who are we as people, and to create a revolution in the world that we so desperately need. First, we must create a revolution within ourselves. So all of these things were just so inspirational to me. And I was just like, let me see how I can channel this through song. So luckily my close collaborator, Chucky Kim,
Shout out.
Yeah, love Chucky. He had actually spent an afternoon in Detroit at Grace Lee Boggs' home with a few of his friends before she had passed away, and was really moved by that experience and her approach to community organizing. And so him and I co-wrote this song called Grace Lee.
And you partnered. Okay, before I go into partnership with We Are Uprisers, I do want to point out a couple of things that I think are really important to highlight once again, is that you took a month to be in Joshua Tree. And I think what that means is that you chose to invest in your ideas and in your voice. And I think for anyone listening to this and watching, first, hello and thank you. And second, like, it is totally a gift that we can give ourselves if we are in that place, even if it's like a day that we honored our artist voice. And I love that you took initiative to just give yourself that. So that's the thing that I really wanted to bring up. And I think it's the part that moved me a lot too, beyond the song being great, is also the partnership that you did with We Are Uprisers. So can you share a bit about what that partnership was?
Yeah, I think for me, I wanted to just make sure that the song that I created in honor of Grace Lee Boggs and in honor of the ways in which she really understood that artistry and creativity are at the heart of social change and organizing, like that which kind of reawakened and re-inspired and reinvigorated me and my purpose. I wanted to make sure that that was just going to something larger than just me releasing another song on streaming platforms. You know what I mean? So I'm lucky enough to be connected to Scott Kuroshige, who is the president of the James and Grace Lee Boggs Foundation. And they're actually planning on creating a museum at James and Grace Lee Boggs' home to kind of further their mission and to continue to be a space of creativity and collaboration and community organizing. And so I hit up Michelle, or I think I played Grace Lee for Michelle, and Michelle was like, I love this song. What can I do? What can we make happen? And I told her, well, I've already talked to this illustrator, Janelle Kwabuyan, who's going to be creating an original illustration of Grace Lee Boggs. Perhaps we could make some merch items, and all of the sales, or like 50% of the proceeds from the sales of that merch line will go to fund the foundation and fund this vision of creating, I think as important as it is for, Asian American culture to be celebrated in like the vast halls of like a Carnegie Hall or like a Smithsonian, like I think there's equal, if not more important weight to be put on creating spaces like what will be the James and Grace Lee Boggs Museum.
So excited for that.
Really intimate spaces of breathing history, and yeah, just to be able to experience and perpetuate the legacy of their work, I think is so powerful. So yeah, that's that on that.
Incredible. Yeah, I'm excited. That could be another great space for Detroit, for people to go. And I love how the Motown Museum is set up too, where it's also in Detroit and it's just an intimate space, and you can feel like what you said, living and breathing history. So I really look forward to that. I think that's very, very incredible. Yeah, We Are Uprisers is an apparel company founded by Michelle Hanabusa, and then she went on to co-found Hate is a Virus with Tammy Cho, and they've done such incredible work. I think they've raised $1 million for their community action fund. What I love about them is that they are constantly challenging themselves to be more mindful of their potential blind spots. Like what you said earlier, right? Like we have our own obstacles as Asian Americans, AAPI people. And I can only speak from my own East Asian perspective, but for me personally, I feel like 2020 was a time where I really understood the role I had to play and how I was contributing to the harm that was being placed upon Black and Brown communities. And that was a very tough and a very important realization of really understanding my day-to-day actions and how they build upon the patriarchal oppressive structure, which is also fed by my desire to be accepted by a family who doesn't understand art and wants. And so I took action in ambition, climbing those ladders and wanting to show that I was worthy and enough in a business, which then leads to just the solidification of this ladder that is already problematic, which I love. And I learned from Sonia Renee Taylor, who is like, we need to break all the ladders within our hearts, within ourselves. Like, right. Like, and the way she put it was so, it's not just about career prestige. It's not just about streaming prestige. It's about like, do we view ourselves as on a hierarchy from someone who is thin to someone who is not? Do we, like, there's all these ways we can compare ourselves against each other. So it's very, very inspiring stuff. And I relate in terms of the COVID creative time. I think there was a point of time where I was actually writing a lot to cope with the anxiety I had. Was I writing great songs? I don't know, but I was almost like compulsively leaning into songwriting to help myself with anxiety. And then eventually I stopped, and then I had a creative dry spell for a while because I think a lot of us were also just listening. And if the brain is focused on so much newness, like there's so much unknown that it's hard for us to feel feel focused enough to be able to create. But it seems like you've had this creative renaissance. And so there's so much more music that you've released, and I encourage everyone to check out Hollis's music. And if there's anything you want to promote, and then after, I feel like we could tee up the Grace Lee video and people can enjoy the songs themselves.
First of all, thank you again. Like your music, your artistry, your purpose, your honesty, and just the way that you just continue to pursue your truth, like through all of your work, is just deeply inspirational to me. And shout out, you're somebody's beloved fundraising effort and campaign, and just the way that your artistry is connected to your purpose is so meaningful to me and always teaches me. So thank you. And thank you for holding this space. So I'm going to be releasing my debut solo album soon, TBD on exact date. But I have my latest single, Less Like, is out now. And I think without much further ado, this is Grace Lee by myself and Checky Kim.
Eyes flickering, mind flittering like the neon light she was born above. She lived a way she had never seen done, carved a path beyond the concrete lines, in solidarity and sacrifice. Grace Lee knew there was better ahead. Grace Lee said to fling our vision open wide. Change is inevitable. We gotta reimagine everything. Reimagine everything. Move past factories and fallacies to cultivate who we are inside. If we grow our own, we can hold our own. Use our hands to build a world where we belong. A revolution born within a song. Grace Lee knew there was better ahead. Grace Lee said to fling our vision open wide. Change is inevitable. We gotta reimagine everything. Reimagine everything. Reimagine everything. Reimagine everything. Reimagine everything. Reimagine everything.
LaunchLeft aims to create an intentional space that highlights and empowers all artists for whom radical creativity is not a choice, but a necessity. LaunchLeft begins with music, but its ultimate aim is to launch left-of-center artists in all creative fields.